Welcome to the Women on Fire podcast. We're on a mission to help you have your best menopause and rest of your life. I'm your host, Jenna Moore. I'm an integrative health menopause coach, and I've studied nutritional awareness, women's hormones through a functional medicine lens, and explored various modalities, including breathwork, mindset, and positive psychology. Join me and my guests as we discuss how to navigate the natural life transition of menopause and growing older, from waistlines, waning libidos, and what to wear now we're over 40. We discuss it all. Women on Fire is sponsored by MenoMe, a New Zealand-based company by women for women. MenoMe specialises in evidence-based, all-natural supplements to support you through every stage of menopause. I'm very excited to introduce you to my guest today, Dr. Wendy Sweet PhD. You're going to want to listen to this episode because not only is Wendy a fountain of knowledge about peri and post-menopause, she's also an award-winning presenter and educator. So, to give you a bit of her background, she started her career as an ICU nurse. She's no longer practicing. And then she moved to the fitness industry. And in fact, she was one of the pioneers of personal training. And she's won the Australasian Fitness Educator Author of the Year award and the Exercise New Zealand Award for Most Outstanding Contribution to the New Zealand fitness industry. She went on to become a university lecturer in the space, and while she was there, she became curious about how women perceive their aging and the role of exercise during their menopause transition. So she undertook her PhD. So she holds a master's degree in lifestyle behavior change and a PhD in women's health and aging. So she's very well qualified to talk to us today. She tells the story of how, when she embarked on her PhD, she realized she was in perimenopause and struggled with it, and heard similar stories from the women she was interviewing for her doctoral studies. So she realized something needed to be done. As smart women do, she pivoted, and her passion and purpose is now supporting and educating both women and health professionals in multiple countries, I think it's 40 or 50 countries, about menopause through evidenced lifestyle science. It's something I'm passionate about too, and it's now almost a decade since I trained. And that was at a time when menopause, particularly perimenopause, was still being swept under the carpet. Certainly not now. It's very much in the mainstream, come out of the closet. And there's a lot more research coming out every day, which is exciting. And but even though I'm in this space every day and I'm constantly updating on the latest happenings and the latest research, I felt like I needed to add more layers and undertake more formal studying. So I've been following Wendy for a while because she is an expert in this space, but she also used to contribute to a fitness magazine I used to work with. So I undertook one of her practitioner trainings, and it has blown me away, everything that is added to my knowledge. So I asked Wendy if she would join us as my guest on Women on Fire and share some of that phenomenal expertise. And while she's based in the beautiful South Island of New Zealand, she's often traveling the globe. And in fact, she's just back from some time in Europe, which was followed by presenting at the Australasian Society of Lifestyle Medicine in Australia. So I'm super excited that she took some time out of her busy schedule to join me here today. I really hope you enjoy the episode, and I know that you'll gain lots of little nuggets of knowledge. Hi, Wendy. Thanks so much for joining me at Women on Fire today. I'm so happy that you're here to share your phenomenal, I called it phenomenal in your intro, knowledge on the subject of menopause, perimenopause, post-menopause. So can we start? And we were just talking before, so I had to stop and say, we've got to be recording this. This is absolute gold. So can we talk about your story? Because weren't you doing your PhD, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, you were embarking on your PhD, then realized you were in peri, and then were hearing similar stories. Would that be correct? And struggling with it.
Mm,
Mm.
mm, mm. Thank you, Gina. It's wonderful to be here, and yes, there are so many stories about the the realization about menopause, and it was the same for me. I think for my generation, I'm in my early 60s now, and for my generation, there really wasn't a lot of information about the menopause transition, this transition from perimenopause to menopause to postmenopause. And as I was saying to you, I think a lot of women are very similar in that they don't realize the stage of life they're in, because there's so much, or certainly back in my time, there wasn't a lot of emphasis on it. And I have been a great supporter and educator in the New Zealand fitness industry. It's always been a part of my life, and as part of that journey, I kind of pioneered the personal training industry here in New Zealand for the Les Mills Group, and then I went on to move into academia and around health and fitness and sport and exercise education. So I was in that space when I arrived in my late 40s, and I had done my master's degree on lifestyle behavior change, and I was then moving into my PhD, which was about exercise and midlife women. So as part of that, I was, I had my head deep in the research on women's health and aging, because I really wanted to understand the demographic between 45 and 60, which really hadn't been pinpointed or hadn't been explored a lot, because a lot of the researchers in aging, particularly aging and physical activity, had been focused on the over 65 population. So my supervisor at the time was really keen for me to start exploring this particular demographic of women between 45 and 60. So I was just doing what we all do, and continuing on with my life without understanding anything about menopause. Didn't even give it a thought. It certainly wasn't something that was spoken about. And like many of us, I really didn't think about the various symptoms that I was experiencing that I just didn't think anything about. I still remember having, the odd hot flush and sweating, and not associating that with menopause. But the story I was telling you was when it really hit home to me was I had been doing my normal exercise. I think I was at a spin cycle class, and I came out of that class, endorphins are supposed to be flying, and got into my car in the car park. And by the time I got home, I felt like bursting into tears. And I'd noticed that my emotions were all over the place. And yet this was something that I really hadn't experienced for many years. So I suddenly started to think, oh, I wonder if this is what menopause is, or I wonder, there wasn't even perimenopause, it was just menopause. And so I went to my doctor and explained a couple of my symptoms to her, and she reached over and got the prescription pad and said, it will be menopause with the age that you're at. I'll write you a script for antidepressants. And I was absolutely horrified, because I she knew what I was doing with my research, and obviously I've been to her over the years, and she was our family GP. And I said, but why would I need antidepressants? I said, I've never been depressed in my life. I've never had postnatal depression. Why do I need them now in my 50s, especially when they are so hard to get off? And she said, well, this is what we do for women in menopause who are experiencing mental health problems. And I said, well, hold that thought, because I'm going to go away and do some research. And I have been lecturing on exercise, particularly aerobic exercise, and how this was now a known management for mild to moderate depression. So I wasn't interested in menopause, I was interested in depression per se. And I suddenly realized that for many years I had been doing high intensity activity, which was all part of the physical culture here in New Zealand. There's been such an emphasis on high intensity interval training, on heavy weight training and spin classes and all these different exercises. And yet we've moved away from aerobic exercise. So that was one realization. And then, because I had my head in the healthy aging literature, women's healthy aging literature, I began to better understand the incredible role of vitamin D on women's health as they age, and this trajectory towards cardiovascular disease, towards osteoporosis, sarcopenia. All roads started with the change in vitamin D levels in women, particularly as they come through menopause, because the skin is aging. And of course, that's where we absorb a lot of our vitamin D. So I trudged back to my GP, and I said, I need a vitamin D test. And she said, why do you need that? It was this constant kind of not arguing, but having to justify, what I wanted. And I said, because this is what I believe is happening. I do back-to-back winters. My son is a competitive skier. I am high risk for low vitamin D. Could we test it, please? I haven't had it tested for years. And of course, she said, well, we don't tend to do that because it's a paid test here in New Zealand. So again, there's another barrier to women getting a vitamin D or vitamin D test done. And I said, look, I'll pay whatever. Just tell me, I want to test this, because it's coming up in the literature all the time. So anyway, we tested it, and it was low. It was incredibly low. And therefore, even though I lived in the North Island in New Zealand at the time, and it was very interesting, and it made me reflect on how much of my life at the time was inside, not outside. Whereas in the past, it had been outside. Even when I lived in the South Island, I was always running outside or cycling outside or walking outside. Whereas moving into a bigger city, I had been going to the gym, and I had been inside a lot more, particularly with my career in academia. So my life was inside, and I got quite a shock then to see how low my vitamin D was, and how it wasn't being picked up in this particular stage of life. And yet, we get so concerned about osteoporosis and sarcopenia or osteopenia, these diseases around bones and muscles, and certainly. So that was my personal entry into thinking to myself, why don't we know this? Why don't I know this? Here I am as a women's health educator working in the university system, and I don't know enough about this particular stage of life. And yet myself and many of my contemporaries who have pioneered the fitness industry, we're the first generation to go into menopause within the context of the changing physical landscape here in New Zealand for women. And also, if you think about it, the changing nutritional landscape and the incredible stress. So I always say, we all know that women are unique, but we are unique because we aren't our mothers, and we don't live the lifestyle or the life that our mother's generation did. And this is what prompted me to explore this area, or this transitional time in a woman's life, which all women go through, and which has become highly problematized and highly medicalized, but yet there's so much more that we need to be factoring in.
And we can bring in that lifestyle, can't we? But I think that's the same for women the world over, with the the exercise, the differing exercises that go through trends, don't they? And we go through nutritional trends, and um, uh, so many women do have low levels of vitamin D and aren't aware, as you say, about how important that is. So we live in a time where there's much more awareness about menopause now, particularly perimenopause,
Mm,
because as you say, that word was never bandied about. And you call it the bookend of puberty, don't you?
mm,
And there's a lot of messaging around now, like women have to lift more and more heavy weights. They have to eat more and more protein. They
mm,
must be taking creatine. Um, so, I mean, those are huge subjects. I've got some really huge questions here because this is a very multi-layered complex biological process, isn't it? So, if we break that down, if we start off with exercise, say, because that's your background, is that right? Should women be lifting heavier and heavier weights? Is this because of the knowledge that we've got now? Because then, and I know you point this out, but I often think it as well. In Eastern countries, it's things like Tai Chi
mm,
and Qigong. So is there a mix of this? Is there a best choice?
mm.
Mm,
Um, that is it's such an interesting question, Jenna. So thank you. But I have a rule for all of my ladies on my program, and the very first rule is if you are not sleeping and if you have muscle pain, which is bordering on fibromyalgia, then you are not to do heavy weight training. So first and foremost, every woman is different in her response to and tolerance for exercise. And one of the things that I talk about in my programs and in my practitioner training is the concept of theories of aging. And one of the theories of aging is the inflammatory theory of aging. And there are many women like myself who've been exercising for many, many years and have a high tolerance for doing the exercise. They may not be recovering very well, but they have a high mental tolerance for pushing themselves, and so it's really hard for those women to understand that the pushing themselves when they're not sleeping and when they've got delayed onset muscle soreness or muscle pain, they are pushing themselves over into overtraining syndrome, and it's called RED-S, or reduced energy deficiency syndrome, because if women are doing high volumes of training, and I don't care whether that's endurance training, or they're doing lifting heavy weights or doing a spin class or a personal training session, if they aren't sleeping, then over time they accumulate more inflammation and that makes their sleep worse. So it becomes a vicious cycle. So that's always my number one rule is if you're not sleeping, then cut back the intensity of your exercise and the volume of your exercise, because the not sleeping and the joint and the muscle soreness and joint pain is your body telling you that it's got increased inflammation. And the perimenopause stage, as we move, and perimenopause is described as the years whereby you're starting to move into your reproductive, the end of your reproductive years, but you're still menstruating. So perimenopause is very different from postmenopause when women aren't menstruating. So women who are menstruating, if they're not getting the right nutrients, particularly iron, and a lot of women are moving off red meat now, but they're still doing a lot of volume of exercise. And if they're not sleeping, low in vitamin D, which we've just talked about, which is involved in the muscle contraction, and they're low in iron or vitamin B12, that's the trajectory towards overtraining syndrome, or this RED-S. So that's number one, is you cannot put all women into the same category. And I think that is one of the greatest misinformation around all women should be doing heavy weight training. No, they shouldn't. That is an ideology that's come out of osteoporosis prevention. And yes, we do need to do some strength training, but not all women tolerate heavy weight training, particularly those who've never done any weight training before, and those who have done a lot. And have taught, classes and all sorts of things. So that's number one, if they're not sleeping. The second thing is the greatest risk for women post-menopause is actually heart disease. And I just presented on this a couple of weekends ago at a lifestyle medicine conference, because the missing ingredient for perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause is actually discussions around cardiometabolic health, especially women who are overweight or obese. And the thinner, leaner women do very well with weight training. You go and put heavy, women who are thick set, who are overweight or obese, you go and make them lift heavy weights, which, by the way, requires high levels of protein. They're going to get bigger. I haven't spent 30 years in the fitness industry observing women to not understand that. And their risk is around the cardiovascular risk. So we're not having enough discussion around cardiometabolic health and the importance of aerobic exercise. Heart disease is the number one health risk for women in New Zealand, Australia, the UK, America, and Canada and Ireland. And we're not having those discussions about baseline aerobic fitness. And one of the challenges that women have, which again often doesn't get discussed in the exercise environment, is that as estrogen starts to decline, that's also impacting their lung health and the inside of their blood vessels. So aerobic exercise has been proven. It's listed by the American Heart Association as the number one factor for women as they move into their menopause transition. And they must, they've got to work on their aerobic fitness. And if you think about it, the genre of bodybuilding and heavyweight training is anathema to cardiovascular fitness. They just, you cannot build muscle and be a runner or a walker or a swimmer. So, or you can, but you have to do a mix of both. So I follow the American Heart Association guidelines. If women want to do heavyweight training, then that requires a completely different nutritional approach. It requires them to be sleeping. They don't understand that because muscle grows at night. So again, if they're not sleeping, then why do heavyweight training? Because you're going to tip into muscle fatigue, soreness, sore joints, and also mood swings as well, because the body is trying to recover from the heavy weights training session. So my message is always different strokes for different folks, and body type is really important to take into consideration, as is cardiac health or cardiovascular health versus bone health.
So if you're, no one's average, but just say you're average, you want to get, a good amount of exercise in a day. You're a walker. You feel like you should be doing some strength training. And I think Pilates and yoga come in here too, don't they? But if it was you were going to the gym and using weights and the machines, but doing your moderate, not doing the really real lifting, is that going to cut the mustard?
It depends. It depends on your level of fitness, and it depends on what you're progressing towards. And anyone who understands exercise prescription knows that exercise prescription is all about progression. So therefore, if women are interested in building muscle density and muscles, the bone density, what they don't realize is that the bone density comes from the muscles pulling and pushing on the bones. So getting that variety of training in is really important. And yes, the load has to be enough whereby you're working to fatigue. But, if you think about it takes many, many years for bodybuilders to develop the experience that they and tolerate the loads that they need to. So what we want to do is we want to understand that there's different forms of resistance, and essentially what we're trying to do initially is wake up the nerves. We want the nerves control the muscle contraction, and so does calcium and some other nutrients. So first and foremost, if a woman is just starting out, and I have these in my Rebuild My Fitness program, if she's been active over the years, or she has been active when she was younger, and then over the years, we all know life gets in the way and there's no time, and she's just thinking about getting back into exercise, then she needs to start off with lighter weights and body weight and just wake up those muscles, wake up the nerves that haven't been using, and do some aerobic exercise and do some, swimming is the best thing for blood pressure, and do the exercise that gives her meaning, that she loves to do. And if we can find ways to add, to give women exercise that they love to do, then they will do it. And I've seen too many examples, and everyone knows this, that people join a gym and then but within 3 months they've all left. In fact, that's how I started my PhD. I don't know if you know this story, but I had finished my master's training. I hadn't decided on a PhD topic. I was working in exercise education here in New Zealand, and I was invited to go up and sit in an education forum up at a conference in San Francisco. And there was all the big players in the exercise education market, and one of the presenters, at the time, she was managing the women's health clubs throughout America and Canada, 10,000 women's health club. And she did this presentation, and she said, this was probably a decade ago, and she said, I don't know what's going on, but women between the ages of 45 and 52 are the highest demographic to join our health clubs. And then she paused, and then she said, but by 53, they've all left. And we don't know why that is, and we need better education around this. And I sat there going, I know why it is, because I had seen the same in New Zealand. Or what was happening, and you will have experienced this too, women were self-selecting to go to yoga and Pilates, to go to those low-impact classes, and leaving the high impact classes, or leaving the step classes because they felt dizzy, as I used to. So that was what piqued my interest, because I had seen anecdotally, I had seen a similar situation here in New Zealand. And I thought, I wonder why that was. And over coffee, I was talking with my master's supervisor, who ended up being my PhD supervisor. And I said, I've heard this really interesting discussion up in America around women attending health clubs. And he said, that's a really great topic, and you need to go out and talk to these women. And I did. I talked to women from the top of New Zealand right down to the bottom of New Zealand. And I talked to them about exercise in midlife. And every single one of them had positioned their healthy aging, so that was the term they used, their healthy aging, every single one of them had positioned it in high intensity exercise or heavy weight training, because that's what their personal trainers or their exercise instructors were telling them to do. And when I said, why was that? Every single woman I interviewed gave me the same answer. And that answer was, because I don't want to age like my mother. And when I explored that with them, I said, well, what do you mean by that? And they all said, oh, my mother, by the time she was, going through her 50s, she put on a lot of weight, or she had heart disease, or she had mobility issues, or she developed dementia. And I said, so why have you thought that doing high intensity exercise is the stepping stone to your healthy aging? And she said, because my personal trainer told me. And I said, so what knowledge has your personal trainer got around menopause and healthy aging? And she said, every single one of them said, oh, I don't know. I just expect them to know because they're my exercise professional. And at the time, I was training, I was lecturing a lot of these exercise professionals. And I thought, well, I haven't mentioned menopause in any of my lectures. So they will know very little about this unless they've been through it themselves. So that's what piqued my interest. And then when I said to them, my subjects, well, how is all this intense exercise going for you? Well, the floodgates opened and they talked about not sleeping. They talked about hot flushes. They talked about not losing weight despite all the high intensity exercise. They spoke about sore joints and muscles and restless legs and mood swings and all of these things, but they didn't mention menopause. They just thought it was something they had to tolerate because they were doing heavy weight training and high intensity exercise. And I thought, wow, this is phenomenal because they shouldn't be experiencing these changes. You know, the muscle soreness, the trainers were saying, oh, it's normal after heavy weight training, it's delayed onset muscle soreness. And yet they could hardly do their jobs because they were so distracted with the muscle soreness and they were waking up with restless legs and sore joints. So that's what really piqued my interest. And I'm very adamant that this messaging that's going on around heavy weight training for all women is not correct. It is really important to understand that first and foremost, women need a bone density test to see if they are at risk. Secondly, they need to be sleeping. Thirdly, they need muscles and joints which can tolerate that load. And fourthly, they need to be following the American Heart Association guidelines, which only says 2 to 3 weight training sessions a week. And my experience was that women, here in New Zealand and possibly in Australia, we've got a lot of emphasis on exercise. And women are going to the gym and they don't understand the difference between aerobic exercise, so steady state cardiovascular exercise, versus anaerobic exercise, which is that power, high intensity exercise. So they might be doing a heavy weights training class one day, but then the next day they're doing a spin class or a high intensity F45 workout. Well, those are two anaerobic workouts because they make you work a lot harder. And then they might be going to yoga or Pilates, which again is a strength-based workout. So their muscles are never getting time to recover. And as women come through menopause, their muscles can take up to 72 hours to recover because it's a lot more slower because the muscles are aging. And then they're getting to the end of the week and they're wondering why they feel so exhausted, but they haven't done any aerobic exercise. And that's where we're building the mitochondria, whereby, that's turning over oxygen, which is what we need for our energy.
So,
So every woman is different.
but there should be some rest days in there.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Like
Yep.
how many on average? I
Well,
know.
the American Heart Association guidelines say 5 days a week of aerobic exercise, 2 to 3 or minimum 2 to 3 resistance training, and then you can mix up a couple of those aerobic training with with a little bit of more vigorous exercise.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
definitely a rest day. Yep.
So when these women are experiencing these signs and symptoms, because I know that they can be signs and symptoms that you're talking about, like sore joints, etc., are they triggered by the exercise or are they their perimenopause, menopausal symptoms, which, as I know, a phrase that you use is uh, menopausal chaos can be invisible.
Mm.
But in a lot of signs and symptoms are thought of as mood swings and hot flushes, and that's all. But there's a whole lot more to it. There's metabolic syndrome, there's this musculoskeletal disorder, which I said to you before that I suffer, but I didn't know what was going on because
Mm.
I hadn't done the learnings then, and all the gut and the liver issues as well, which I want to come back into specifically. But would the exercise exacerbate those symptoms?
Not necessarily, Jenna. In fact, that's where the question I ask women in my own programs is, what do you want your exercise to achieve? Do you want it to achieve performance? You know, we've got the Olympics on at the moment and very high performance there. Or do you want your exercise to, to promote your health? And it's two. I think a lot of women don't understand that those are two very different goals that they need to be set. If you want to exercise to help you lose weight, and often it doesn't help you lose weight, again, if you're not sleeping, and if you've got gut health problems or fatty liver disease, then the exercise may not be helping you, it may be hindering you, so you need to lower the intensity. And if you want your exercise for health, then again, some women the exercise is making them unhealthy. But everything gets back to recovery. How are you recovering? And, there's a saying in exercise science, which is, if you can't tolerate the exercise after 20 minutes, then give up. Because you're exercising tired. And this is where I come back to what I said earlier, which is, if women aren't sleeping and if they're absolutely exhausted, then they are training tired, and that is the pathway down into overtraining syndrome. And you mentioned, my saying there that menopause chaos is invisible. Well, it's invisible when women don't understand that to be able to tolerate extra loads of exercise, they need to get their blood work done. And the bloods that are really important are vitamin D, which we've talked about, because that is needed for calcium uptake in the small intestine. It's also needed for muscle contraction. Calcium is a neurotransmitter. It helps the nerves jump into the muscles and will open up into the muscles, and it allows the contraction. So if their calcium intake is low, if their vitamin D is low, then they're going to move into sore muscles, and possibly restless leg syndrome at night as well, which is very, very common in women who are regular exercisers. Then, of course, you've got the need for magnesium. You've also got the need for iron. If women are perimenopause, they need iron. Compared to post-menopause when they're not menstruating. So all of those factors are really important to allow muscles to recover. It's never about the exercise session. We can all go out and run for the bus, or or do something that activates adrenaline. And we can, many of us who've been exercising for years, I could walk into the gym tomorrow or go, skiing as I do at the moment. And it's the next day that you know what you've done, or if you've overdone it. And so women are continuing to do the exercise that they've always done. Nothing wrong with that. But what they're not understanding is that they're now in perimenopause or menopause. And therefore, the hormones are changing. The follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, which are the cascade that moves, that if they've got functioning ovaries, then that sets that cycle for estrogen and progesterone. We know estrogen is important in muscle contraction. We know estrogen helps to hold magnesium in muscles, and that's why, many women go on HRT because they're not tolerating their exercise. But what they don't understand is all these other changes around the body. And, with a view to and a nod to exercise science and the fact that the Olympics are on at the moment, the other thing that women don't realize is that when they're doing high intensity exercise, so they're doing exercise that makes them huff and puff and, really fatigue themselves, day after day, 7 days a week. Some women do that. They don't even have a rest day. And so what they do, and that's where heavy weight training comes into high intensity exercise as well. So they might be doing high intensity interval training, and they're doing heavy weight training one day, high intensity interval training the next day, and on it goes. And they do that, every single day of the week. And what they don't understand is that their muscles are changing as part of the normal response to aging. And I use that term on purpose. I know everyone's focused on anti-aging at the moment, but internally, our organs and our muscles are aging. And part of the aging response with muscles is that we're losing some of the type, they're called type 2B power fibers, and we're losing some of the mechanisms within those type 2B muscle fibers as estrogen and progesterone start to decline. And interestingly, by the time we're in post-menopause, those type 2B fibers are now becoming type 1 fibers. So they're more endurance focused. And the question is, can we hold on to those power fibers as we get older? Yes, we can. We can hold on to some of them, but not all of them. And if women aren't sleeping, then that's the trajectory towards losing some of those type 2B power fibers, because we need that secretion of growth hormone overnight to enable that hypertrophy or that growth of muscle. So it's very complex, but it's all about moderation and balance. And you mentioned too, the fact that there's different cultures around exercise, and it's really interesting because if you have a future forward focus with your exercise, the question I always ask is, well, what do you want to be doing in 5 years or 10 years? Do you want to be hiking the Camino? Do you want to be, skiing? Do you want to be how active do you want to be, and what activity do you want to be able to do? And therefore, exercising in ways that enable you to do those movement patterns as you get older is really, really important. Not only important for muscle health, but for brain health as well. I have a lot of women on the My Menopause Transformation programs who, they've now got more time, because the kids have left home, or they've finished looking after their parents and that sort of thing. So they've got time to go hiking and cycling and all these things that they want to do. But they've come through menopause, all they've been doing is heavy weight training, and they're not aerobically fit. And it's that aerobic fitness that I believe is being missed out on. So finding that balance between all of the different modes of exercise is important. And never before have women had so much choice around exercise. I mean, in the 1980s, we just jogged and swam and rode a bike, There wasn't the variety in all of the different exercise modalities. So gait is really, balance is really important. Walking is really important, because we want to walk the older we get, and feeling strong.
Mm, mm. And because there is the loss of muscle mass, isn't there? So
Not for everyone. But there is
not if you
some because
continue.
of those type 2 power fibers. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Right.
But magnesium helps with that, as does diet. And
Okay.
in fact, vitamin D and there's very good research on the Mediterranean diet and extra virgin olive oil to
Yes, which I
maintain
want to go
to
come to.
prevent sarcopenia,
Oh,
which has nothing to do with exercise.
Interesting. Let's talk about that. But just switching back for one moment, what about creatine?
Or creatine.
Creatine. Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of women don't know why they're taking creatine.
Because that's all over Instagram at the moment, and I'm sure my blood said I had too much of it, but I can't remember that.
I get really frustrated when women are looking at Instagram and social media and going, "Oh, I must do this because so and so says," or my friend is taking it, and they don't understand why. It's a bit like collagen, isn't it? Um, so creatine is helps in muscle contraction. It is creatine phosphate is part of the energy cycle pathway, and we produce creatine when we're doing high intensity exercise. When from a disease perspective, we lose creatine in our urine when muscles are breaking down, when muscles are in a catabolic state or breaking down. So creatine is a test that can be used to decide if there is muscles being broken down. It depends on the state of your kidneys. If women are doing a lot of weight training and are dehydrated, then I guarantee they're going to have changes in their creatine levels. And of course, the thing about creatine is that it's been used in sports science and sports nutrition to right from it was only in the 1990s that it became part of the discussions around sports performance for men, not for women. And it was part of the mantra of stronger, faster, bigger. So a lot of our rugby players here in New Zealand would be going on creatine phosphate, but it has to be cycled for 5 weeks. And a lot of women don't understand that you don't need it every week of every year. There is some research to say that it's okay, there's not at risk, but my issue is it's women aren't understanding that their organs are aging and the kidneys are aging, and the tiny little blood vessels in the kidneys are increasing their stiffness. It's called vascular stiffness. I'm always going on about that in my practitioner programs and in my programs, and therefore it's the kidneys that have to excrete the excess of creatine. And if women are already eating meat, chicken, eggs, and meat, they're getting creatine in those foods, and then they're taking creatine to help support muscle recovery after heavy weight training. But again, if they don't have good kidney functions, if they've got high blood pressure, I would be really exploring the risk to having that creatine phosphate with their trainer or whoever is telling them to take it. So it's like anything, Jenna. It's for we have to explore the research specific to the menopause transition, and creatine is starting to come out in that research. I keep an eye on it, but again, different strokes for different folks. If women have a good diet, they're getting some creatine in their diet. Do they need that as a supplement? Because a lot of the time, women taking creatine are also taking protein powders. That's a lot of stress on the kidneys that have to excrete all those extra nitrates that are going into the body.
Thank you. Yes, which brings me to now, for a lot of women, the reason they start exercising so hard is because of the weight gain, the meno belly, the bigger boobs, the things that can happen during perimenopause. I think I put on 20 kilos in perimenopause, um, because everything changes and what used to work for us doesn't work for us now. And so much changes, but also this brings us to our macronutrients, protein, fat, and carbs, how we shouldn't cut out whole groups of those things because they're essential to us. But there is a message out there I just saw this morning. I'm eating 120 grams of protein a day, and this is what happens. But that's not ideal for everyone, is it? I know it can help with satiety and things. So, but this roller coaster wheel that some women can get on due to the weight gain is all of a sudden starting to run 7 days a week and then trying to eat like a bird, or starve themselves. That's not going to work, right? So can we talk about that? And can we talk about protein, protein, protein? Should it be all protein, protein, protein? Mm.
There's so many. How much time have you got, Jenna?
I
Because
know.
I could go on about this all day. Okay.
Yes.
My position is always women's healthy aging, and those two words, healthy aging, are absolutely crucial, because healthy aging isn't just about protein, and it's not just about, exercise. It's about a number of dimensions. And you said about the meno belly and the weight gain. Well, the thing is that um, it's part of why I have two different programs now. I have one for thinner, leaner women and one for overweight women, because you cannot look at nutrients and macronutrients and food and protein intake without looking at body type. Does a woman want to lose weight or doesn't she? And how much weight does she want to lose? If a woman, you said you put on 20 kilos, I put on 15, at least 15 kilos. Part of that was not sleeping. It certainly, I was exercising every single day, doing heavy weight training, doing, high intensity exercise. But what I was missing was the fact that I was also having a high protein diet. And the high protein is the foods that are typical in our culture: chicken, eggs. I was on HRT, the pill at the time, had a lot of stress and wasn't sleeping and was eating meat nearly every single night. The more that I was doing, the more I realized it wasn't working. So why continue to flog a dead horse when it's not working? And I knew that there had to be a different way. So I began to understand, again, that was another, epiphany, a light bulb moment. And that was, this is all about metabolic syndrome: high blood pressure, high cholesterol, an expanding waistline over 80, if it's over 80 centimeters, then we need to be focusing on metabolic syndrome. A high protein diet and a heavy weight training does not fit with metabolic syndrome research. What fits with metabolic syndrome research is actually to lower the protein content, and if it's animal protein, then don't forget that all protein, but particularly animal protein, is thermogenic, heat generating. That's why in the 1990s we used to get women on high protein diets, because it supported an increased metabolism, but by God, it made them feel hot as well. And it certainly made the bodybuilders feel hot. So if women are already feeling hot, then why are we getting them on a high protein diet, which is a thermogenic food? So that's number one. Number two is large ladies with metabolic syndrome. It's all about the liver and the gut. You mentioned that before. So we can typically understand that the liver, when women are doing a lot of exercise, they're turning over glucose in their liver. It's called gluconeogenesis. And that can be contributing to liver inflammation. So one of the things that happens is that we need to be supportive of liver health and gut health as we come through menopause. So my focus is always, for my weight loss ladies, it's always sleep first and foremost. I don't care about exercise. They can get up in the morning and they can do some cardiovascular exercise, but until they're sleeping, I don't bring in the high intensity exercise. And but they have to focus on the liver, because if we don't have a healthy liver, then how can we turn over the nutrients, including protein, which is needed for muscle regeneration and muscle support? So if a woman has steatosis, which is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, then that's the starting point. If a woman has a bloated gut because she's got a high protein diet and not exercising, where is that excess protein going to? Well, I hate to break it to them, but it's going to fat cells. So they're going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the more The other thing that I really focus on is the fact that when we have a diet that's high in estrogen foods, so you talked about the big breasts and the belly, then when women are putting on fat, and the fat starts off as, you know, subcutaneous fat near the skin, then it can shift towards visceral fat, the deep visceral fat that sits within the organs. That fat is now known to be hormonally active, and it's storing estrogen. So the estrogen storage in fat cells is now one of the shifts that happen, and you have to explore, well, why do a lot of women, why do most women in the world move from menopause to post-menopause and put on this belly fat and put on fat around the back and under the diaphragm? And why do some women, not all women, but you know, the women who are larger, and I have a lot of empathy for them, because I know what it's like. I know, you know, when they're putting on size in their breasts, the breasts are replete with fat cells. It's one of the areas that has the highest number of fat cells, and fat cells love estrogen. They are estrogenic. They produce their own estrogen, estradiol. And so what larger women and obese women aren't understanding is that they need to get off high estrogen foods. And this is something that I am very particular about in my programs. Eggs and chicken, which are bodybuilding foods, which are targeted towards, you know, bodybuilders and people wanting a high protein diet, are very high in estrogen. So for larger ladies who are having all these foods that are high protein, and they're feeling their breasts get tighter, they're putting on belly fat despite all the exercise, then they need to be looking at their liver health. So that's something that I really, really focus on. And the protein, it's interesting because there's two sides to the protein story. There's one side which says, oh, you need 2 grams per kilogram a day. Well, if you're 100 kilogram woman and two you're having 2 grams per kilogram of protein a day, that's 200 grams of protein. And where are you going to get that? If you're an average woman, you're going to go, oh, I'm going to get the chicken and I'm going to get the eggs and I'm going to get the milk and I'm going to get. So where are they getting their protein from? They don't understand plant proteins versus animal proteins. And they don't understand that in longevity studies, the work that's come out of Professor Walter Longo and the Okinawa studies, that the average protein intake is the minimum for health, for healthy aging, and the minimum for ideal health is 1 to 1.4 grams per kilogram of protein a day. And I'm not into bodybuilding, I'm not into sports performance. There's other people who specialize in that. I'm into average women who want to lose weight and who don't want to worry about their food. We're the first generation of women that have been dieting for years. Well, I got to the point where I just thought, I don't want to go on another diet in my life. So we start off with 1 gram per kilogram of protein per day. And we, that's 4 or 5 servings of protein, 20 milligram servings, and you just get some wonderful plant protein into your diet. But the thing that we're forgetting is that protein only works with carbohydrates. So we've got to have the glucose and the starch from the carbohydrates. So I'm more focused on carbohydrates and low glycemic index and healthy carbohydrates and fruits and vegetables. And then a lot of women too. I've had thousands of women do my programs over the years. And when I get them off a high protein diet, they suddenly go, oh, my joints aren't sore anymore. Because, and protein can be detrimental to the cardiovascular system, depending on the type of protein that we have. And it can put up blood pressure because we've got that vascular stiffness. So if you've got someone screaming at you on social media or Instagram and they only look about 30 years old and they're not in menopause, then don't listen to them. You have to understand, the science of what's going on. and the purpose of your workouts. It's the same with the keto diet. It's had a lot of interest, but the keto diet, by the time we've moved from menopause to post-menopause, the liver is changing in size and volume because it's aging. All our organs start to shrink as we get older, and therefore a high-fat diet whereby you're up to 50 to 60% fat is not indicated in cardiovascular health and liver health. In fact, there's now really good research to show that a high-fat diet in your 50s and 60s can lead to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And that can be really problematic for women as they age. If women are doing endurance exercise or they are doing a lot of exercise, then sure, they can shift that fat intake up a little bit, because fats, get moved into the mitochondria and help to give us energy. But again, that process in the mitochondria requires on good on really good gut absorption and liver health. So you can't look at the macronutrient intake without understanding the health of the gut, and the liver comes first. And gut health is really, really important. I've got a symptoms quiz which goes out around the world, and nearly 60% of women who take that symptoms quiz, and there's been over 500,000 women who've taken that symptoms quiz now, nearly 60% say that they've got gut health problems. Well, if they've got gut health problems, then I'd be really looking at how much protein they're having and reduce that a little bit.
Thank you. And I did want to touch on keto because, yeah, it just doesn't feel right for me for women at this life stage. And you are absolutely right. How much time have we got? I can't keep you all night, which I would love to, but can we just very quickly perhaps touch, well, is there the best diet for women at this life stage? I know that there's so much research behind the Mediterranean diet for women's health. It's just amazing. So could we just touch on that? And maybe that wonderful little tip you were going to give about extra virgin olive oil as well.
All when you actually look at the research on women's health and aging, and that is the framework, that is the paradigm that I operate in. As I say, I'm not into sports performance and fitness performance. There's other people that do that. So first and foremost, women need to say to themselves, what am I trying to achieve? Do I want to be an athlete, and therefore I need a sports nutritionist, and I need to be focused on all of the the macronutrients that I want? Or do I just want to age well and follow the evidence for brain health, for improved muscle health, and just general health and well-being? And so all roads point to the Mediterranean diet, and women have to understand that there are 5 principles to that Mediterranean diet. First and foremost, 8 to 10 servings of fruit and vegetables a day, 20 to 30 mils of extra virgin olive oil a day, and that is the hallmark of the Mediterranean diet, extra virgin olive oil. It needs to be a really good quality one, which is expensive, unfortunately, but it's got compounds in it, hydroxytyrosol and allopurin, which have been evidenced as functional foods to help improve cardiovascular health and joint health, as well as gut health. So the extra virgin olive oil is a principle of the Mediterranean diet. So too is having more beans and legumes. So having 3 or more servings, and a serving is around about half a cup of beans and legumes every week. So can women, if you're used to having a meal that is meat heavy every single night of the week, as I used to, then how can you switch the family over to having a vegetarian meal a couple of times a week? And that's how women need to be thinking. I think food gets overcomplicated, and it gets overcomplicated because we're too busy thinking about or listening to Instagram or social media or whatever about doing this and doing that. most women I know just want to be able to have a decent meal with the family, put a meal on the table. But my goal is for them to look after themselves. So we want a Mediterranean focused diet. And I know myself, back in those days where I was coming through perimenopause and menopause, I had 2 teenage children in the house and they were athletes. I had a rugby player and I had a swimmer. So I was feeding them without understanding. And there was a lot of pasta and a lot of starch and a lot of meat and chicken and all those sorts of things, which are known in sports nutrition and certainly for growing children. However, what I didn't realize was that my needs were quite different. So if we can follow the principles of the Mediterranean diet, increase the fruit and vegetables, get that extra virgin olive oil into you. Women are scared of grains, and yet the grains are a hallmark of the Mediterranean diet. And if we can have, some organic oats as part of a low glycemic index breakfast, then that's really helpful. Having a rye bread and a sourdough bread, which has got a longer fermentation time, which allows the gut to heal. Your gut recognizes these real foods and recognizes some grains, unless, of course, women are celiac, which, then they've got other things going on. And of course, we've got our beans as well. So those are really important strategies that women really need to think about. If they want to lose weight, then every single bit of weight loss evidence talks about just reducing some of the high calorie foods. And so to me, nutrition it's more about these days what you don't need. And if I went into, a typical pantry in New Zealand of a middle-aged woman, I guarantee I would see a lot of ultra processed foods. And these are the chips and the crackers and the snack foods. I'd probably see protein powder. I'd probably see all sorts of things. But if we can move to a whole food diet, I want to see a woman's fruit bowl full of citrus. Citrus is a known component of the Mediterranean diet. It's high in limonoids, which help to cleanse the liver. I'd want to see greenish bananas, which are high in resistant starch, which is important for gut health. I'd want to see apples. Since COVID, we've had a lot of research around quercetin in apples, which are a known anti-inflammatory, and they improve lung health in women, which is changing. And I'd want to see avocados in that fruit bowl. And then in the freezer, I want to see the purple berries, those anthocyanins, which are going to dilate the blood vessels and help to reduce blood pressure. Changes to blood pressure are one of the most important factors that women need to be monitoring. And coming back to what we were saying about heavy weight training, and a lot of women coming through menopause, that heavy weight training, working to, the veins are popping out of their neck, that's going to put up blood pressure over time. We've seen this back in the 1990s with a lot of powerlifters and bodybuilders and studies that came out of many other countries. So really, I just think that the if we can keep the messages as simple as possible for women, it shouldn't be hard for them, and really empower and educate them to think about the Mediterranean diet. You mentioned fasting. It's not for everyone. It's certainly, I follow the work of Dr. Walter Longo with his fasting mimicking diet. So I'm really focused on women eating, because what they don't understand is that one of the major causes of these symptoms is stress, and the brain is using up 25 to 30% more energy when women are under stress. And whether it's emotional or physical stress, workplace stress, family-related stress, doesn't matter where that stress comes from. But as women come through menopause, then the brain and the liver are demanding glucose. They're demanding food. So when when women are reaching for the wine bottle and they're reaching for the snacks and they're reaching for the chocolate, they're not feeding themselves properly throughout the day, and that can be a really big factor that women need to focus on as well.
Because alcohol is another subject in itself, but yes.
Well, it's interesting, women are drinking, still drinking a lot, and then they're going on HRT, there's an adoration for HRT, but HRT and alcohol increase their risk of breast cancer. Alcohol increases risk of breast cancer. Add HRT to that with higher estrogen levels, and they're just adding to their risk of breast cancer. So, and unfortunately, that message isn't coming out.
Mm. Well, thank you, Wendy. I know, I wanted to talk about the gut. I wanted to talk about the liver. I wanted to talk about the arterial stiffening, but you only have so much time. So thank you very much for joining us. It's been amazing.
Thank you, Jenna, and to the listeners as well. It's wonderful to be able to share this information. And there's always a newsletter to sign up to on the website, My Menopause Transformation.
I can put those links in the resources in the show notes.
Okay.
I will do that. So thank you, everyone, and
Thank you,
Women on
Jenna.
Fire. Thank you for listening to this episode of Women on Fire. If you like what we share, please subscribe and give us a rating and or a review. In addition, visit our sponsor's YouTube channel at MenoMe 100, where you can subscribe and watch all of the interviews. That's the best way to support this podcast so we can continue to bring it to you. Thank you for your interest in midlife, menopause, and Women on Fire.
Let's keep this fire.